if you take an example of a task, like giving an example of a non-software task that I did for a client the other day, we had a meeting and needed to design a proposal. So we discussed this proposal of what it's going to look like. My note taker was taking notes. When I was done with the meeting, I didn't say, hey, write this proposal, because it would be useless. It would have to distill all the conversation, figure out and say, okay, near the end of the meeting, we discussed this approach. That's the approach that I want. Add 1, 2, and 3 to this approach, and then figure out the proposal. So judgment doesn't get substituted there. Like I have to select what is good and what is bad and tell it to it. But then I didn't have to spend, I don't know, an hour doing like a 3-page proposal. That's boom, it just spits it out, and it's actually pretty good. I can go in and say, okay, like you mentioned these kind of words over here, those don't feel with the sentiment that I had. Please go fix that. 2 seconds later, it gets fixed. And then you can ask it, do you have any ideas of how to improve this, right? And I might have had a few ideas and I already put them in, but sometimes I'll miss things, right? Because I'm human and I'm getting older, and sometimes I forget stuff. So then it can go back, and it gave me like a list of 20 things. 10 were junk, 7 I already had, but 3 were like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. So tell me more about this, tweak it a little bit this way. And with that kind of workflow, you can, it took me 20, 30 minutes to do something that would have taken me like a whole day to build. And I think people that are not doing this sort of thing are really missing out, because that's a massive productivity booster.
Hey everyone, today we are joined by Thanos Diakakis, a technology leader with over 25 years of experience helping startups and high-growth companies overcome software bottlenecks, scale engineering teams, and deliver high-quality products faster. He's held leadership roles at places like Uber, and today he's deeply involved in how teams are leveraging AI to do better, faster, more human-centered work. And today we are going to dig into what AI is great at, what it struggles with, and how leaders should be thinking about integrating it into their workflows, not just how to save time, but to elevate the quality of the work that their teams produce. So if you've been wondering where the real value of AI lies, this conversation is going to help you clarify that quickly. The core thing that I'm really seeing is a lot of agencies are really not sure of where AI even has a semblance in their day-to-day, really, right? So what I'm curious to start with is, what have you personally found AI to be surprisingly good at or surprisingly bad at in your experience?
It'll be fun to talk about it as to what's happening this week, right? Because whatever was happening last week is kind of different. And I think that actually brings a little bit of where the fear of people is coming from, right? Because they read things in the news and they hear things from their friends, and it just changes so quickly that at some point it's just easier to say, you know what, I'm just going to go play over there because this is just too complicated for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a mistake. I think everyone should get deeply immersed into it. There's this really good stuff you can do with it. And just to go actually answer your question, I think it's good at almost everything at this point in time, right? It may have been that maybe 6 months or a year ago, it was hallucinating, it would give you wrong answers, and it would be pretty bad at certain things. But I'm increasingly finding that a lot of these things are getting addressed, and I'm leveraging AI all the time. There's almost nothing that I do nowadays that doesn't have some aspect of AI with it. This the simplest, silliest question that comes up, you can be like, oh, well, I always wondered this my whole life. Why don't I just feed it to the AI and see what solution it comes up with?
I mean, I definitely feel like it's embedded now in a lot of my day-to-day life. I do continually get more and more surprised at the things that it is really helpful with. The thing that I find interesting, and I'd like to maybe expand a little bit more on that, is maybe a recent project or a recent thing that you've used it for that you think, 6 months ago or a year ago would have just been impossible to do, and how it was actually particularly useful. And then 2, the context component, the thing that I continually run into with people that end up kind of finding AI not as revolutionary as they should see it, is that they're trying to get AI to do thinking for them, a replacement for them. And I just don't see it as being that, at least not yet.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one. So I use AI mostly for engineering tasks. That's my day-to-day. My 6 to 8 hours a day, it will be doing coding and related tasks. Mm. And this is relevant to other places as well. So this example translates even if you're not doing coding. But when I was doing coding 6 months ago, you would ask you have a feature idea. I'm building this feature, and I kind of design it in my head, and then I'd take the first 10% and be, hey, AI, build this first 10% and start with this file. And it would build you this little thing, and you'd look at it and be like, this is wrong, fix it this way. Okay, you'd move past, and just little bit by bit, you could build up, and it would save you a lot of time, because each chunk that it would do the typing for you. It would mostly correct, sometimes some research involved, it would go figure it out. What's changed in the last few months is agents. So agents is basically AI in a loop with some access to tools. And now I can give it the whole feature description. It's going to go break it down by itself. It's going to do a much better job than it did 6 months ago. And then it's going to go in the loop and do all the 10 parts one at a time, knock them out, fix itself as it goes, and deliver this thing mostly ready for me. So that's quite nice. It didn't have the capability before to do this. And maybe before, if it was 90% good at every step, 90% times 90% times 90% is like 10% chance you're going to get it after 10 steps. But now if it's 99% at every step, now there's a 90% chance or thereabouts, don't correct my math, that you'll be done by the end of the loop. So I think these agentic flows are becoming much more interesting. And as I've been using them for coding, I'm sort of super excited to start exploring them outside coding. So for example, would I trust it now to go and almost book my airline tickets, right? So go and here's the parameters and go figure it out. I mean, maybe don't have access to my payment, but you can go up to that point in time, like do more complicated tasks for me. And I think we're probably there, and I'm beginning to see different applications that are stringing this together here and there. So I think that's going to be a super exciting development.
I generally really agree. It's the logic piece that needs to be applied to it, and where the agents become particularly useful, and workflows that are being built into it with, agents being built with agents on top of agents, right? Like that just become really incredibly useful. But I don't see the removal of the specialized human component of it. And I think that there's like this, there's a lot of pushback I see. And so there's some teams that I work with that I see like just they're really leaning into it and quite excited about where AI is headed. Most often the owner, where the team is quite hesitant or even avoidant of it. And I wonder what your take is on it. I have my own opinions of it, but I'm wondering to begin with, what is your take and why that might even be the case?
Well, I think people don't understand how it works. And I think that also ties back to what you said of they don't know how to use it correctly. So sometimes I like to start with a very simple, like for human beings, not for engineers, explanation of how the AI works and kind of explain what it's doing, because that helps guide how you would use it. And once you understand that, you'd be like, oh, I see why this never works. And I see why that thing always works. So you mentioned kind of judgment, right? And I agree. I don't think we're at the point yet that the general AIs are going to be able to replace human judgment, right? Because they're trained on the whole internet. So their judgment is the judgment of the whole internet, which, shall we call it average? Like it's trained out on a lot of stuff. So it has a lot of good knowledge, and it's able to give you like an average view of everything. So if I'm designing my workout and in general, I know nothing about exercise, it's probably going to do a better job at me than doing that. So I'll get some decent workout better than what I would have done by hand because I know nothing about it. However, if it's designing software, and I've spent 30 years designing software, it's extremely unlikely it's going to do better than I would designing software. So I'll figure out what it's good at, what's bad at, and then supplement the parts that I'm good at with it. So if you take an example of a task, like you're getting an example of a non-software task that I did for a client the other day, we had a meeting and needed to design a proposal. So we discussed this proposal of what it's going to look like. My note taker was taking notes. When I was done with the meeting, I didn't say, hey, write this proposal, because it would be useless. He would have to distill all the conversation, figure it out, and say, okay, near the end of the meeting, we discussed this approach. That's the approach that I want. Add 1, 2, and 3 to this approach, and then figure out the proposal. So judgment doesn't get substituted there. Like I have to select what is good and what is bad and tell it to it. But then I didn't have to spend, I don't know, an hour doing like a 3-page proposal. That's boom, it just spits it out, and it's actually pretty good. I can go in and say, okay, like you mentioned these kind of words over here, those don't feel with the sentiment that I had. Please go fix that. 2 seconds later, it gets fixed. And then you can ask it, do you have any ideas of how to improve this, right? And I might have had a few ideas and I already put them in, but sometimes I'll miss things, right? Because I'm human and I'm getting older, and sometimes I forget stuff. So then it can go back, and it gave me like a list of 20 things, 10 were junk, 7 I already had, but 3 were like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. So tell me more about this, tweak it a little bit this way. And with that kind of workflow, you can, it took me 20, 30 minutes to do something that would have taken me like a whole day to build. And I think people that are not doing this sort of thing are really missing out, because that's a massive productivity booster.
One of the things that I also, and I mean, I generally agree with you, but one of the other things that I think is also at play, and I'm curious on your take on this piece, it's kind of like the idea that you are working at an organization and then someone was just replaced with the exact same title, like was hired with the exact same title. You know that you're feeling like maybe they are here to be trained by you to then replace you. And I feel like there's a lot of fear that AI is going to be replacing team members, and like this idea of them not having as much value in the future world. So they're kind of pushing against that concept themselves. My own experience with my own career, really, it's like I'm going to push back to me being, CFO at an agency, is that even with the later years of me being at a C-suite level person, the reality is that I was probably still only spending 20, maybe 30% of my time doing work that actually warranted the salary. And the rest of it was a lot of lower level things. And that's really what I see the usefulness of it. And yeah, what is your take on that?
My opinion is that the fear is a little bit warranted, right? It really forces you to rethink, where do I actually add value? Because if I literally could be replaced by a more junior person trained by me plus an AI, maybe I'm not adding that much value. Now, and that has had me personally sort of rethink of similar to what you said, I'm spending 20% of my time doing at my pay grade level, and then the other 80%, wow, why don't I outsource that and do more of the stuff that I really add value at? And then there is some more fundamental questions that I then eventually had to look at, saying, so where do I actually add value? What is the thing that I'm really good at? What is my superpower that no one else has? And over the last few years, I've sort of been honing in that and being able to say, okay, this is what I do really, really well. And I don't think the AI, actually, I should. Every time I say I don't think the AI, I go back and think about it 6 months from now, maybe it will. But right now, we train the AIs on the internet, right? So is it possible that 6 months from now, you can take an AI and you can train it on Thanos' life experience and then create something that has similar judgment to Thanos? Maybe. I'm not saying this is not going to happen. I don't see, it's this. I said 6 months ago, I don't see agents coming out really fast, and here they are. So is it possible 6 months from now you can train it? Yes. I think the training problem is a little bit more complicated of how you'd get that kind of judgment built in and that whole experience where maybe not there quite yet computationally, but that is something that could happen. But that's where people stay ahead by sort of continuing to hone their craft, right? That's where you can't stay static and be like, this is how I do things. I figured it out in my 20s, and I'll go through my 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s doing the same thing, right? You just have to stay adaptive and figure out how to become better at what you do.
Yeah. You said something I think that is interesting, right? Because the reality of 30 years worth of experiences, you're saying in your case, right, is that it's an accumulation of logic that you've applied. And in this specific scenario, I'm going to think about these particular outcomes, the specific risks are associated. So then I'm going to prioritize these specific risks because they're higher likelihood and all of that sort of piece. And I mean, the reality is eventually probably will get there if you're able to build in that logic, but someone has to build the logic into it. And I don't know whether that's 6 months from now or 5 years from now, I'm not sure, but it eventually theoretically can happen, but it also has to do with how much logic has been applied to it. And it's something that you accumulate over time, and making sure that those different scenarios are then built into the system, right? I mean, the thing that AI is so much better at than I can ever be is holding a lot of information in at one given moment and then considering all the different factors, right?
Yep. I do think this is eventually going to happen, because I don't think there's anything super special about sort of our brains in that way. We are pattern machines. If you pay enough attention to your own thinking, you can recognize this, where certain words or certain things that you say trigger certain other words. Well, AI can do that, and it can do that way more than you can. So yes, I've had 30 years of sort of selectively training my brain to work in certain ways and learn certain things and produce certain judgments. So I think it's a matter of time until AI can produce these same selective trainings and get to that part. I think we oftentimes think we're way more special than we are in the brains department.
Speak for yourself. I'm pretty special.
Right. Yeah, of course, everyone else. But we think we're so good, and at the end of the day, we're pretty straightforward kind of neural circuits there. So I think the AI is going to catch up, and we're going to find out that at least most of our thinking is pretty straightforward patterns that we can replicate. And for a lot of the things, I was doing the exercise example before, there's a lot of things that I'm by far not an expert on. So just getting the average the average solution there on the internet with my specifics in there will be way more than I could do, which then enables me to, even it enables me to do something specific at that point in time, but it also enables me to learn about that thing and then eventually become good at it and become more broad at something.
I think it allows for us also become more deeply specialized as we remove, in our example, what we were saying, that 70 or 80% of our time not being spent in things that really are the valuable things that we should be doing based on our experience, that if you're able to spend more of that time, and even let's get it, say you invert it where your 80% of your time is in that high value oriented stuff, the amount of experience that you're going to be able to derive over that time makes you more valuable. And I think that at the very least, whether what happens happens in the long term economically and societal wise, like, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball any more than anyone else does, really, right? But I think that if there's a longevity to any person, and the importance is actually focusing on that value. The next thing that I think would be useful for us to talk through is a little bit more of like that workflow component, the agent piece. And how do we see specialized teams using agents in a meaningful way of like, how do they think about a process or a workflow that they currently have? And then kind of where do they think about where human judgment should actually come into play, where it stays in the loop, at least in the phase that we're currently at, where it can't make the judgment calls itself?
Yeah, so one fun part to start with this is in very sort of layperson terms, just explain how an LLM works, right? Because I think there's a lot of confusion surrounding that. So when you go into like ChatGPT, right, when you type something in, that's a conversation, that's a thread. So if you start, when you type in the first message, that's the first piece of context that it builds up. Context is basically like this set of information that stays in the conversation, that the LLM is continually consulting as it gives you responses. And what we're doing is we have a question, answer, and the LLM just tries to continue answering what's happening in there. They might have some specialized prompts injected beforehand telling it what you should do and what you cannot do that protect it, but that's context. And when you hit new chat, that just starts off like a new thing. So one of the things that we started talking about a few years ago when this all came to be was how do we manage this, right? So let's say I start a conversation and I ask something not in quite the right way, and the LLM goes off on a tangent and answers something slightly different, not what I wanted, right? I could spend some time and say, oh, no, I didn't mean this, I meant that, so maybe please adjust the conversation. But now I'm getting more redundant context in there that may be confusing the LLM. It may be more effective just to hit new and just rephrase it the right way and ask it again. So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind of how that context works. So you're not dealing with a human. You don't need to explain yourself. You just need to ask a very precise question that gets you from A to B or where you want to go in your workflow. So that's number one. Number two is we're beginning to see that in addition to context, some tools are developing what we call memory. And what this the way this works is that maybe you have a second agent or the same agent, sort of the same flow, is looking over the conversation and it's instructed to look for anything that seems important that I should keep in mind for later, right? And that's, I'm simplifying this. There's much more sophisticated prompts because you have long-term memory, short-term memory, project memory, ephemeral memory, and so on. But with a bunch of these variants, the LLM can sort of learn a little bit about what you're doing. And then the next time you start a chat and you ask a question, a side agent might go back and say, hey, go look in memory and see if there's anything relevant to this question, and also inject it sort of in the prompt. Right. So you have to learn a little bit about how your tools work in these respects, because that helps you figure out how to prompt them or what they know. So if you're building any kind of workflow with your systems, with the LLMs, if you put junk in, you're going to get junk out. So it's really good to give it as much precise context as you can. Now, they're good at keeping a lot of things in their head, but they're not that good. They're getting better. So if you give it too much, you're also running a risk of like just making it forget what's important and not know how to answer your things. So I kind of start with like, okay, with my understanding of what this particular tool or whatever I'm working with works, okay, what is the right ways to inject the right things to get the right answers? And some of the times you may start with, okay, here's like a bunch of documents. Go look through these, figure out what's important, and then generate me another prompt. And then I clear the context, start a new chat, and just take the shortened version of this and give it a different prompt of what I want you to do with this. So I think of in terms of what is the context and what is the prompt, what I'm asking you to do, and I can create multiple sets of these to create a workflow that answers. But by the way, if this sounds complicated and like, holy cow, where do I start with all this? I'd say start somewhere, like start with something simple and sort of build up from there. You quickly sort of build the knowledge and the feel of how this works. If you haven't done it, this might seem overwhelming, but like you get the hang of it pretty quick as you get going with it.
Agreed. I mean, I am not a developer by any means, and it's something that I'm doing every single day, building even workflows now, and I'm not that person. Like, that is just not who I am. And it is actually a lot easier and a lot simpler once you just start to dive into it. I'm curious, though, on how someone can be looking at that workflow piece, because the piece that, for me at least, and speaking from a personal side of things, I got quite stuck in the idea of like that context component of when is too much information being provided, when does it actually make sense to break it down into different workflows? When am I trying to get too much out of this one specific chat that I'm having with it? And how do I need to like break it down into that like smallest digestible chunk for AI to be able to process? And then how do I even look at the consistency amount, right? Because the reality is I can rely on AI now, at least in my own experience, on certain things. And then I know that on certain things, like I can't rely on it to produce the result that I'm looking for. And so I need to break it down further, then it becomes more reliable, right? And how do you think about Where do I have like, here's a question, maybe there's 4 questions that lead into that question. How do I even start thinking about those kind of workflows and the breakdown of it and getting to that smallest digestible chunk? And when do I need to be involved in even looking at it?
Yeah, so there's a trade-off, right? Because you could give it a really big question and wait a little bit and it comes out with junk. Or you could give it a bunch of small questions and you spend all this time sort of stringing them together. And you can, I think with really small questions, you can get to it better because it's pretty good at answering small things. And then because you do quality control at every small step, so then as you group them together and make the bigger steps and sort of build out the output, you're more likely to come up with good results. The problem is that's much more labor intensive and you don't want to be doing that. Unfortunately, there is no general answer that I've found yet. This varies across tasks, right? Different tasks, it might work better with smaller chunks and it might be better at other things where you can work in bigger tasks. So I would advise experimentation and you will develop an intuitive feel pretty quickly with this stuff. So I would say start with a big chunk. Like if you really know it's not going to work, then, go a size smaller and go medium chunk and experiment. And if you find out, no, this is too terrible or too awful, go in even smaller chunks. Sometimes you can even have it do the work and saying, I have this really big chunk, help me plan through it. And it will break it for you in the smaller chunks. And then you can feed them in one at a time. So you can do these kinds of tricks, but it's always like a little bit of experimentation. And I think it depends on the domain and the complexity of what you're doing to kind of find out where to right size it. And challenge your assumptions over time, right? Because if you learn like, okay, this doesn't work, I got to go small chunks. Well, if that was 6 months ago, well, maybe now it does. So go try that one out again. It's really annoying because I get a tool that I like and I use it. And I now I'm really good at it. And someone else says, oh, this tool is now even better. And I go do an experiment for like a month and, oh yeah, that tool is a bit better. And then you change your workflows again. So there's a lot of that happening right now. And I think that's how life is going to be for a little while.
There's definitely a lot of that happening. And I echo that frustration as well as excitement. I guess it's kind of both. I'm not really sure which I feel at that moment. The approach that I took, and please disagree if you disagree. And this was the original approach. And I think that things have progressed more so in the last 6-7 months in that timeline. But the way that I was looking at it is that if I were to be talking to myself 20 years ago and explaining the thing that I needed to be doing, how would I be explaining it to myself? And like, what steps would I be having myself do in order to be able to get to the outcome that I'm looking for? And if I were to be managing a 20-year younger version of myself, then what moments in time would I want to be reviewing the work? And that's when I would be injecting myself into it until I saw that agent or that workflow producing the result enough times, the same way that I would have managed a human, to then now let it do it on its own and not need to review that piece of it anymore and remove myself as a human element in that moment. What are your thoughts on like that general kind of approach to it? And am I crazy?
No. I like the approach and I sort of second it as an overall way to think, but I would add one caveat to it, right? So I think the way that you say it is a good way to force you to think of where your checkpoints are at and where I want to inject quality and make sure that, okay, it's 90% here. I will inject myself and make it 100%. So then the next steps are going to be compliant. The one risk that we have that I've seen a lot of people do is think of the AI as a human, because it's not. It's a weirder instance of that, right? It is the most smart PhD with no common sense you've ever known, right? It's weird because it behaves in ways that no human behaves, right? It might knows the inside out in a huge amount of sophistication, more than any person ever could of a particular subject, but like failed to challenge like a basic assumption before it even goes to that mode of thinking. So you sometimes have to understand what it's good at and what it's bad at, and kind of augment that with what you just explained and say, oh, okay, like this is how I do it to myself. Myself had common sense. This thing doesn't. So let me maybe explicitly say this or that or the other, right? And for example, I see this with engineering in many times where it goes with a very smart but overcomplicated solution. And it's like, hey, dummy, like challenge your assumption here. You don't even need any of this. And it's like, it goes back to pandering mode. It's like, oh, of course, you're right. Let me fix this for you.
I think you also maybe had a higher view of myself 20 years ago than I did of myself, because I don't know that I had a whole lot of common sense then either. But
no,
hey.
me neither. But
so you started to talk about it a bit on this like idea of tools, and I mean, there's obviously different LLMs from the Anthropics and Geminis, etc. But from a tool exploration perspective, and then a selection of which LLM to be using for what specific type of task, any guidance of how someone should be looking at that as well? And I see each one of them kind of going a bit in different directions. And a lot of people I feel like have their preferred one that they use. And I'm kind of just playing with all of them to see which one is getting better at different areas. But What is your take?
Here's how I approach it. I say AI is saving me 50% of my day every day. So instead of being frustrated with the new tools that, oh, there's another one that I got to try it. So I'm going to take that 50% savings and apply 10% of it, or 10% points of it to trying new tools. And that is my task. And I've also, I spend somewhat of a bit of a silly amount on trying new things, but I'm not averse to getting a subscription that's 10, 20, $30 a month of something, trying it for a few months and then canceling it, or trying new things. Like, I generally don't want to have too many of these things, but you spend $100 and you get a new tool that may save you like a couple of hours a week. That is paid for itself in spades. So I don't have a preference in LLM. I used to do the development stuff, and like Opus 4.5 from Anthropic was everyone was using it. It's fantastic. And a couple of months ago, I tried Gemini with something called anti-gravity on the coding side, and now that is fantastic, and it's just blowing Opus out of the water. Now, other people are saying that Opus with this other tool works out better. I'm going to go try it out for a month to get a feel of it and see what happens. So for me, we're in the phase of experimentation. There's no, like, if I give you any advice that you'd write down today, then 2 weeks from now it's going to be bogus. So just spend some of the saved time in experimentation, and that will pay you back in spades.
You brought up a percentage, and that's just how my mind tends to go anyways. And that is how I've been telling people to start with, like 10% of your time at the very minimum that you should be investing into AI if you're not doing more. I ended up last year devoting like 25% of my time in totality to just that, specifically outside of what I need to be doing generally. But also I'm a bit of a nerd. Is that a good place you think to start? If, 40-hour work week, spending 4 hours a week in investing into this kind of area, should it be more?
That will vary with your maturity level. That's the thing we do with software engineering. If you're maybe starting off, maybe you'll invest a little bit more than that just because you want to get a kickoff and get going, right? Because you will need that extra time to spend on it. And in the beginning, your performance may suffer because you're not seeing the productivity returns as quickly, right? Because now I took off half my week. I wasn't using AI before. I spent half my week learning it. The other half was still at snail's pace. But now the next week you can use AI 10% of the time. Now you're beginning to see some gains, right? So you're going to have to make some initial investment. And at some point, the investment starts paying off and you start seeing the gains. That now creates some white space in your calendar that you can use, and those investments accumulate. What I like to take to software companies, which is where my bread and butter is if you improve your workflow by 1 or 2% every week, those are, like accumulated interest. I think it's, if you do the math, that's 2% a week is, I think, 2.5 times in a year, and 8 times improvement in 2 years. So these build up. So do spend a little bit of time. Now, once you get good at it, you don't need to spend that much time, or you can reduce the number of time because you're using AI to learn about AI, and you can do all these cool things. So you can bring it back. If you got, a customer commitment that needs to be done in the next 2 weeks, you could cut that one back down for those 2 weeks, maybe bump it up when you're done after that, and spend some more time in there. But make it a plan. Again, like the same thing that we do with software engineering is, instead of just doing the work, spend a little bit of time to think about how you can do the work better. Like, what are some improvements that we can put in my workflow? What are some improvements I can use in my technology? What are some improvements I make to my company culture to make things speed up a little bit?
I like the 1% better idea, really, right? I mean, that is all we really can be doing. And how do you invest the appropriate amount of time? I do see your point in that if you're just starting off, that it may require a larger percentage of your time.
Let me put it in stark terms, though, because if your competition is not only doing the work but improving itself, it's going to take your lunch, right? Because they're going to be 2.5 times better. So it's not really an option to do this sort of thing, right? If you want to stay ahead of the game, you have to.
I absolutely do not disagree with that statement. I do caveat that piece of it is that the thing that I don't want in that statement, I agree that wholeheartedly that you need to be investing. If you're listening to this episode and you are a business owner or an agency owner, you need to be investing into this. It is going to dramatically shift the industry over the course of the next couple of years. The thing I don't want to do with that is make you so afraid of what it actually means, because fear then makes you in that fight or flight. Take it with a piece of curiosity. I mean, I'm taking me back to, a couple of years ago, the first time I was playing with ChatGPT. I was telling it a story of a friend of mine, and her and I on a drive, and I just asked it to take that story and extrapolate it of what happens throughout the rest of our lives. And I was just playing with it, taking a curiosity of what can it do, what can it not, and have some aspect of a playfulness with it, I would say, to begin with, to not have as much of a fear component of it. But and hopefully you end up in the same place that I ended up, but sometime in late 2024, I remember starting to really grasp what was possible and the amount of impact that it would have. And I ran out. It was weekend, I think it was like a Saturday afternoon, and I ran out to my husband, like explaining now fully, like, all right, I think I've got it. And like the amount of applications that I have, it's going to do this and it's going to be able to do this. And it's like, I'm literally jumping up and down, and I'm not an athletic person, and I wanted to go run a mile, you know? And I am still there in that level of excitement of the amount of opportunity that there exists with this technology. And I don't know where it's going, and I don't know what it's going to do overarching to the industry by and large. But if you're not, at the very least, investing a reasonable amount of time and augmentation, you are and will be left behind. And I don't know the timeline, but you will be eventually.
Yeah, and that when you say fear, like people think that if I fear something, it's like an unreasonable response, and I just don't think it is. I think oftentimes when I feel fear, I go and examine and see, why do I feel fear for this? And a lot of times when I talk to customers in similar situations, the thing that comes back often again is I don't understand it. And that creates some confusion. And I'd rather put it in a box and set it over there and not have to deal with it, because I don't like the sentiment of fear, right? And when you can get over this hump and saying, okay, well, let me open this box a little bit and play with this and, start gently and figure out what's happening, then when I understand it a little bit better, then the fear begins to go away. And that just introspection, I think, will help you get over that hump and play with it. Because it is useful to recognize that I'm feeling fear and deal with it, right? Why am I feeling this fear? What does it cause me to do this? And then address that head on. But yeah, fear, panic, put it in a box, never touch it again, bad.
Agreed. I'm glad that you found that level of tranquility with it. I don't even know that I have found that really. I mean, I think I've shared with you, and I definitely have shared with my therapist and a few others, is that like the thing that I've been realizing recently is that the physiological response to anxiety and excitement are exactly the same. And I don't know which I'm feeling most of the time anymore. But damn, am I like excited about the direction of where things are headed and like the amount of opportunity that there is with all of this. But again,
I don't think I've ever had so much fun with software engineering in my whole career. Like it's the fun when I was 5 years old and discovering how you can, make the thing write stuff on your TV. That was as fun. But now it's like every crazy idea that I had in my head, I can sit down for a few hours and have a first draft of it. Wow.
I was legitimately told by a friend that I've had for, 25 years, and I was talking about AI and where it's kind of headed. And he looked at me like blunt faced and was like, this, I think, is actually the happiest I've ever seen you. I both like appreciate that and also take a little offense. So one thing I do want to...
That's the right response.
So one thing I do want to hit from like a prompt perspective is, how should I be thinking about like the crafting of a prompt? Like for me, one of the things that I'm doing, right, is like I'm taking context of what I'm looking to have as an outcome. I may be even using AI to help me craft what it is that I'm looking for from a prompt to create an agent or what have you. What is your thought process or like the workflow that you're currently taking in the context determination and the creation of a prompt now?
This may be a lot simpler and dumber than you might be expecting as an answer, but it doesn't bother me that much anymore. I think when I was doing this a year or two ago, maybe put a lot of effort into the prompt and figure it out and craft it and all that stuff. I don't. I actually don't even type my prompts anymore. I use an app called Super Whisper, and I just hit a button and I just yap. I don't even read it, what it does. I just hit send and off it goes. And I think overall, if you're using this a lot, if the AI spits out something that's bad, that I clearly recognize that my prompt was off, I'll go back and fix the prompt. If I tried it a couple times and I'm not getting anywhere because it's grossly misunderstanding something, which rarely happens anymore, I might ask the AI, like, okay, I'm trying to do this, make me a prompt. But I don't think, this prompt engineering that we used to talk about, I don't know, 6 months ago or 12 months ago is any more a thing for me. Like I'm getting pretty good results without putting a ton of effort into the prompts.
Okay, awesome. And one other question from an MCP perspective, like that is definitely something that is being talked about quite a lot. Can you explain what it is and what it actually has as an implication for the use of AI?
Yeah, so MCP is a fun subject, and it's hard to explain it without getting too technical, but AIs can use tools. And what you're telling the AI is, here's the availability of some tools, and here's how to use them. So you're basically saying, let's take a simple example. Like AIs aren't really that good at making calculations. So if you have it multiply two really big numbers, the language models don't know how to multiply two really big numbers, but it can tell these are two really big numbers and figure out how to use a calculator to add them up.
Yep.
So one thing you can do is you can tell the AI there's a tool called a calculator. And if you need to do a calculation, then output this specific string where it says like tilde, 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 add, parentheses, a big number, comma, another big number, and comma. And then I will take this, I will feed it into a tool, it will do the multiplication, I'll give it back to you. So anytime the AI needs something, it can output some output that then causes some computer thing to run the tool and give it back to the AI. So the AI itself doesn't really run any tools. It just knows that there are tools, and if it wants it to output something, that someone else will do the work and give back the AI the results. MCP gives you the ability to tell the AI about all sorts of tools that are out there to do all sorts of things. So you want it to interact with your bug database or interact with your content management system, add a post, remove a post, add a comment, do things. You can give it the capabilities to do so. The security of these things is kind of pretty poor at this point in time because it's very easy to give your LLM access to these tools, because essentially when you give it an MCP server, you're not like saying, here's a tool, but here's a tool. And the LLM can output something. And when it does, something's going to run in the background and do an actual thing. So you're giving it a bit of permissions that you got to be careful with. I'm very, very stingy with my MCP. It's okay if it's read only, but it almost never can actually do something in the outside world beyond create a Jira ticket or create a calculation somewhere. So there are places where it's really handy. So for software development process, if I'm writing software, I give it access to my bug database. So I don't have to go and say, grab text over here and say, I want to build this feature. I just say bug number 123, go get it. And it will go get it and do its thing. There are some really cool tools that are coming up, especially if you want to have memory or, information that is in the background. You can say, hey, I connected to this with this background information system, go get information from there. That also gets kind of interesting. There's a lot of techniques because if you have a lot of information, it needs to know what information to get. And we talked earlier about how you want to get just the right amounts and not too much, not too little. You might have heard of things called embeddings or things called RAG. These are kind of different tools and technologies to go figure out which of these parts to fetch to get that information. So I would say, just to make this practical advice, is if you suspect you can make your LLM richer by giving it some read-only access to some information you have or tools you have somewhere else, go figure out how to incorporate MCP in your workflow and add a few things. Don't add 20 things at once because it'd be too complicated. Add a few things and work out how, as you're prompting the tools to say, hey, by the way, you can, if it doesn't, you can go over there and get this info so I don't have to tell you, and experiment with that.
You brought up something that I have like a really funny, frustrating memory. It was about a year ago that I was trying to get ChatGPT's custom GPTs to do math calculations for me, and legitimately would not properly do 4 + 4 = 8 in certain instances. Or and one part of it was doing the right output, and then another time it wouldn't do the right output and just not consistent enough. And I at one point picked up my laptop it's so smart but also so dumb at the same time. When a listener to this episode is wanting to really explore AI and has some questions of how they can go about doing so, I know that you've got some free resources, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, most of my stuff revolves around software engineering. So if you want to look about how to do software engineering differently, especially taking AI into consideration and figuring out how to build these tools in, you can go check me out at cosmicteacups.com. I have a free resource available there, and you can sign up for the mailing list. I occasionally post about subjects of AI and software development and how to speed that up if your company does software development. And I also post a lot on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and chat over there.
We'll make sure to include links to everything in the show notes, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today, Thanos.
Thanks for having me on, Robert.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in today. With all of the shifts in the industry, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of your next move. So I'm not here to try to sell you anything. I just want to give back and guide you through the uncertainty. Whether you're navigating new trends or just need some clarity, we're here to listen and offer advice. Head to creativeagencysuccess.com/chat to book a free 15-minute chat with an agency mentor who can provide you with a fresh perspective. Let's figure out the best steps for your agency's growth together.